evening and good to have you with us in the 9 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. We now put the spotlight on the other big story, the drone terror attack on the Air Force base in Jammu. In fact, over the next 1 hour, we're going to split the conversation in two different parts. One, of course, being on this new warfare threat of the drones being used and how prepared are we for it. We will also put the spotlight on a series of terror-related incidents that have taken place in Kashmir in the recent past, and if these efforts are being made to derail this whole Mission Naya Kashmir, the process of restarting political activity in the valley. Often we've seen the correlation between the two. So we're going to talk about that as well. But first up, let's talk about this new threat. Now, why? Because on the early hours of June 27, two explosions took place in the Air Force base in Satwari, Kent, in the city of Jammu. Now, what we know so far is that first blast took place at around 1:27 a.m. Sunday morning, and a few minutes later was the second blast at about 1:32 a.m. One of the blasts damaged the roof of a building. The second one struck an open area. So there hasn't been any massive casualty or damage. But the problem here is, how did this explosion happen? And sources seem to suggest that preliminary investigation has shown that there were drones that were carrying these payloads and with explosives like an ID or a TNT that was used. In fact, few hours later, about 24 hours later, another set of reports emerged of more drones being seen in a neighboring camp. So from Satwari, nearby it is the Kaluchak military area, the Kaluchak-Ratnuchak area, and reports suggested that there were two drones spotted there, but the alert forces there fired at these drones, which then flew away. What is this new kind of threat that we are staring at, and are we ready to handle it? I have the biggest of the experts joining me on this conversation this evening. Maruf Raza, strategic affairs expert and consulting editor to Times Network, with me this evening. Deeptiman Tiwari, senior assistant editor at Indian Express, closely covering this story as well. But first up, of course, I want to go across to former Indian Army Chief General VP Malik. General Malik, thank you for joining us. We've seen some instances in the past as well where drones have been shot down or captured with some kind of spying software or equipment, or even some weapons being carried. But this would be perhaps the first instance where they've managed to enter a military zone and drop an explosive device?
Yes, this is the first where drones have utilized target military on our output. But as you said, this is not the first instance. In fact, had it come in, because apparently have tools, these kind of drones carry on.
General Malik, there seems to be a technical glitch with the line with you. We're going to just try and fix that, and I will come back to you. Let me just go across to Maruf as well on this. Maruf, how do you interpret what has happened, and how should we see this incident?
Tanvi, there are many elements to it. The first is, everyone's referring to the fact that this is the first time that drones have been used at critical infrastructure targets in India. Today, it's an airbase. Tomorrow, it could have been a military headquarters. Day after, it can be something more important in Delhi. The point to understand is that the use of drones has now become the go-to option, particularly for countries that look for deniability. I take you back to the drone attacks on the Saudi oil refineries in, I think it was September, October 2019, when the Saudis claimed it came from the Houthi rebels in Yemen. But the Houthi rebels, the Saudis also claimed, were being supported by the Iranians. The bigger message was that something which is relatively inexpensive, and drones, the kind which are floating around over Jammu's bases, are in the range of 20,000, 30,000 rupees. And this is very inexpensive compared to the amount that is spent on military wherewithal. The normal big purchases just the Rafale deal, for example, was 59,000 crores. So you can imagine the impact this kind of stuff can have at low cost. It can be psychological, it can be on your security preparedness, it can be to give messages to terror groups that already operate with Pakistani direction in the Kashmir Valley and in Jammu and even in other parts of India, that Pakistan and their hardliners are very much in the game. And it can also be to test India's capabilities and resolve. Now, the point that emerges is that, we only wake up to a threat when the threat comes and hits us on our face. We have various bodies to do perspective and forward planning, but we don't see much of that getting implemented on the ground. General Malik will bear me out on this. His famous statement during the Kargil conflict was that we don't have much, but we'll fight with what we have. And he won the war for us. More importantly, the lessons that we learned from the Kargil conflict are still being slowly implemented and sometimes not being implemented. So when you saw the Chinese roll in Ladakh on the LAC, you saw them doing a number of things that had happened 20 years ago during the surprise that was inflicted on us in Kargil. Now, what do drones do? Drones effectively can help you reach where you cannot ordinarily reach. In this case, all the fingers are pointing at Pakistan, but I would still like to keep a little room for speculation that let us see what the final findings say. Because such drones, which are now floating around on the sky, please understand that India has more than 50,000 or more drones and all being used for civilian purposes, courier purposes, military purposes, reconnaissance, etc., etc. So this is not new in our skies. What is required and hasn't come into being is a proper policy to deal with drones and what should be a regulatory mechanism. The DGCA and the Civil Aviation Ministry is responsible for that. They have recommendations. I know for a fact these have been given to them. I've been part of some studies which have been given to them, but you know how bureaucracy is in this country. And finally, and the last point is that drones are largely made by China, but they're also made by Turkey. And Pakistanis in particular have been studying the usage of drone in conflict, the most recently being the one between Azerbaijan and Armenia, where large-scale tanks and others were decapacitated because of effective use of drones, which can come in as overhead munition, which can come in for reconnaissance purposes, which can also attack hilltops like Kargil hilltops. So all these things can be done. But having said that, this is not the end of warfare as we knew it yesterday. It is another dimension. We need to prepare for it. And we have the capabilities, but they're not consolidated under one umbrella. They're here, there, and everywhere. They have to be put into place. And smaller drones like this normally appear like birds on the radar. So the Air Force radar managers are not going to be jumping at every bird flying through the radar screen at 1 past midnight or 2 past midnight. So that is where they had achieved the impact. It can come across the border or the LSC man-packed. The 15 kgs can be broken up into 2 parts, put onto the backpack of 2 terrorists brought in, assembled in Jammu, and create havoc in the mind of people. But there are ways the services can hold on to themselves and they can protect their establishment.
Absolutely. You know, Maruf, what you said, I just want to highlight that part that, you know, one possibility is that the terrorists cross the border along with this ammunition and then use these drones. But what I feel from, you know, the location of these places also, General Malik, is that one cannot assume anymore that it will, only our borders are vulnerable. You know, Satwari Cant and Kaluchak both are well inside, you know, essentially Jammu city. It's not exactly next to the border. And these are large-scale military camps, multiple military areas which are there. To be able to do this clearly should be a warning sign for us that now we need to consolidate our policy. Now, how do we do that? What is it that is required at the preparation level?
Firstly, Tanvi, I'd like to endorse whatever I've heard from Maruf Raza. As I was myself saying that this was a threat which was coming and we were not taking it seriously enough. We should have been taking it seriously when it was happening in foreign countries, and within our own countries close to the border, it has been happening. So this was coming, so to say. And now that it has become so evident, it has that the drones have come and they have struck a military target and gone back without being hurt, without being damaged. So first thing is that we must develop the technology to be able to detect as soon as they are coming and then be able to neutralize them. And that is not required only along the border or along the LOC. It should now be, we should have that kind of a capability even inside, because we do not know whether these drones were let off by the Pakistani side or they were by the Pakistani proxies within our own country in Jammu and Kashmir. If there are some, and there is also a suspicion that the drones which were utilized in the Air Force Station Jammu, they probably were flown from within the country, because the range is just about 5 or 6 or maximum 7 kilometers. Beyond that, they are not under control. They cannot be controlled. So looking at the kind of range and the kind of this thing, it looks that they probably may have been flown from within the country somewhere where they can watch the target also, which is not so far away. As I said, the range is 5, 6. Now, the most important thing today is to carry out a proper coordinated strategy, have that. And it is basically a technical side which should be able to detect coming of the drones and then be able to neutralize that, which means that to be able to detect, you require radars, you require other gadgetry to be able to see that when they are coming, and it doesn't give you much time, but then whatever time that you have, and then be able to neutralize them, whether you want to fire laser weapon or any other kind of weapons. And that kind of technology is available today in the market. The Israelis are having it, and we are also negotiating, but you know how our negotiations take place. It takes years and years, and till we suffer some damage, and then we start looking at it. That is one part, which is the defensive part. But I believe that in such a situation, we must also have an offensive part of strategy, which should neutralize something on the other side. I remember one incident when I was Army Chief, and we discovered one of the terrorist organization having an air defense weapon, rather not air defense, but anti-aircraft weapon. And they were carrying those Stinger missiles, which they had brought from Afghanistan. And that time when we had a discussion on this, I told the Prime Minister at that time, I said, sir, you have to send a clear message to Pakistan. But in case that we find something, and if anything is damaged, we'll play merry hell with Pakistan. So you have to have both the defensive strategy of the techno-military dimension that I have mentioned, but you should also be capable of sending a strong message to the other side. Because if these military targets are to be engaged by them, you cannot let them be forgotten so easily. So we have to prepare a strategy which uses not just the ministries of ministries in aviation and all that are home. It is a proper multidimensional. Air Force has to be involved. The Army has to be involved in a big way. So unless all these things are coordinated properly, centrally, given a whole picture, we will not be able to have a proper strategy to counter this drone warfare, which is coming. It is going to be bigger and bigger in the days to come.
And you know, I want to also talk about how we deal with this in two different manners. One is the immediate threat, and of course, the long term, which both of you have also referred to, policy making and strengthening our response to such kind of warfare. But Deeptiman, let me just come to you first about what do we know so far about the kind of drone or explosives and the technology that was used. What has emerged out of this specific incident?
Well, what we know so far was that there were two drones which are carrying payloads of maybe 2 to 3 kgs with 2 kg of explosives, IEDs fitted with impact charge, which basically means that when you drop the IED, it explodes on impact. Probably these drones were quadcopters or hexacopters because we have not found these. It happened in the night, and we haven't found any remains. So we assume that they went back. So we don't exactly know what was the make of these drones. But yes, they were sophisticated IEDs. They had high-grade explosives, which were meant to create maximum damage, which is possible through such a means. So this is what we know so far. We don't exactly know whether they came from Pakistan or whether they flew from some nearby area. That will remain a matter of investigation. But yes, this is one of the first instances of an IED attack through drones in India. And that's pretty much what we know as of now.
So, but first instance of an attack, yes, not the first instance of a drone being used for such an attempt, whether in our country or outside. Like our experts have also been saying, Deeptiman, within the government, has there been any conversation so far to take the challenges of threats seriously, of drones seriously? There are all these recommendations lying around for how do you limit drones, especially from high security areas, which are actually still just lying around, whether it's near military camps or even in the big cities.
Well, you're right. I mean, militarily, drones have been used since the 90s. Terrorists, we have seen using them for the past half a decade at least. ISIS, Hezbollah, Houthi rebels have all used drones to drop bombs, to conduct reconnaissance, surveillance. Even Taliban has used drones for surveillance. We have seen attacks on Venezuelan president in South America. I mean, all kinds of attacks. We have seen a lot. We have seen in the past few years in the Middle East. In our own country, we have seen drones being used from across the border to send weapons and drugs and ammunition. There have been, instances where weapons have been recovered in Punjab. Weapons have been recovered in Jammu. One hexacopter was even shot down by the Border Security Force last year. And many of these have been able to carry payloads of as much as 15 kgs. So, of course, imagine an IED of 15 kgs can cause a lot of damage. So there has been some sort of, thinking in the security establishment about how to counter this, new age threat, of drone bombs, or there have been kamikaze drones that we have seen in the Middle East being used. So, of course, the security establishment is aware of this threat. But you see, technologically, as yet we haven't been able to find a foolproof solution to it. We have been testing some sort of technology for the past, couple of years to thwart this threat, but we haven't yet. Even the DRDO has, come up with some sort of technology to detect and disable these drones. There are, as General Malik also was talking about, using these laser guns to, shoot them down. But we haven't yet come up with a foolproof technology. There's a problem with, even their detection. The radars can, confuse. Even, if you, customize it, for very small unmanned aerial vehicles, it can confuse even birds for a UAV. So even if, you come up with some sort of technology to detect and disable, one of the greatest challenges will be, you have a border which is hundreds and hundreds of kilometers with a hostile neighbor. Where do you set up that technology? That will be a strategic decision that you will have to take, because this is a low-risk, low-cost, attack option requiring very little human resources.
Yeah.
So it will be a challenge as to where all you're going to strategically place such technology, even if you develop one.
Correct. I mean, and not
how
just
are
at
you going to
borders,
detect
like I said, Deeptiman, it would also have to be the biggest of your military installations, other, high-profile locations, even in your cities. Both General Malik and Maruf want to make a point. Maruf, to you first, and then I have a specific question for General Malik as well. Yes.
See, 3 or 4 quick points. One is, Diptiman has explained in great detail about all the kind of options that are available in our part of the world or the subcontinent. You must understand that before I respond to the points he's made, that the kind of drones that we have come to know that the Americans have used largely in Afghanistan and even in Iraq was known as Obama's signature foreign policy platform, which was drones and drone-centric diplomacy. Those are different kind of drones. Those are the, Heron type of drones which operate at 35,000 feet or higher in the sky. They can identify anything through gaining information and hitting pinpoint targets. That's a separate game altogether. We are not in it, and neither is Pakistan in it. The second thing is Pakistan had sent its officers to study the conflict that I referred to earlier, the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, and study how drones can be a force multiplier and change the nature of the conflict despite much more heavily armed forces confronting a weaker force. And drones played havoc with them. The Indian Army, incidentally, in Army Day this year, had given a demonstration, which they give some new technology demonstration every year at Delhi Cant, in which they had shown that, a swarm of drones of about 70, 75 drones can be neutralized by alert troops on the front line. So it's not just 1 or 2 drones who come and play havoc. We can take on a much larger number. It's just that now there will be an urgency to address this issue, which until now hadn't really made the newspaper and the television headlines. Also, as General Malik brought out, that, the Americans strangely, armed the Afghans and the Pakistanis with a whole lot of weapon platforms, which became part of what I call the Kalashnikov pipeline. But there were lots of Stinger missiles and others that were given in to basically drive the Russians out of Afghanistan. But the Pakistanis stored those platforms, and there was a common saying amongst them in the 90s that "Humne jash mein Kabul bana liya, ab chalo Kashmir chalo." And General Malik referred to that. The Stinger missiles, strangely, the Americans were willing to pay money to people to buy back their same Stinger missiles, which they had actually pumped into the region. And these are the kind of missiles that can play a fairly lethal role against aircrafts if they wish to. But fortunately, alert security forces haven't allowed them to get past here. The other thing to understand is that the kind of hexacopter model that Pakistan generally uses, and they've been trying to acquire some from Turkey, but the bulk of them of this variety are made by the Chinese. These models can be interdicted, can be intercepted, and can be neutralized. If you go the Sarkari route, you'll wait for another decade before the trials get completed and some decision is made. But the basic local knowledge and equipment is available. It's there in the market that you can actually monitor the movement of the drones up to 5-7 kilometers away from your location, up to 2 kilometers away. You can either jam them and send them back to their home base or knock them off. And interestingly, a lot of the stuff can also be done by the attacker, assuming it's Pakistan, by using their cell phone and therefore ensuring the flight of the drone from being placed in the middle of the bushes somewhere, and it takes off to the location where you give the coordinates through the cell phone. So technology has moved at such a pace. Unfortunately, Bharat Sarkar doesn't move at that pace. So therefore, we have to incorporate, I want to just add to General Malik's point, that incorporate the private sector into privatizing defense innovation. If you're going to wait for DRDO to do everything for you, God help you.
Well,
because
so what I'm hearing here from all three of you is that this challenge, this threat, the drone warfare has been around for a while, General Malik. If for half a decade the terrorists across the world have been using it, not even the security forces, then we know that it's extremely evolved already. But we aren't. Our preparation isn't. Would you agree that it's largely because of the bureaucratic and policy, ignorance that we haven't reached there, that we have the technology available and the capability? We would need it right away. We need it at every single cant. Otherwise, you only have soldiers looking into the sky 24/7, hoping to be able to differentiate between a bird and a drone.
Tanvi, you are making the point right. Absolutely, there is no doubt about it that we have a certain amount of technology which is available today. But when we are now looking at drone warfare, you should be looking at it from its very elementary stage, which is now being utilized by Pakistan in this instance, or in the earlier instance of dropping weapons and drugs, etc., to the higher level, where these will become an important element of our warfare, whether hybrid warfare or low intensity and limited warfare. So you have to look at the complete spectrum. Unfortunately, we are not paying much attention to developing these aspects at all. So while you prepare your strategy, both technologically as well as militarily, you have to look at the complete spectrum. Start thinking about that now. You can't start thinking about this. Today, you may be able to neutralize a drone coming with 2 kgs of RDX, for example. But tomorrow, you will find yourself that they will be able to carry much higher load, and then you will have a bigger problem. So technologically, it is the same thing when you start developing from the smaller one to the higher one. But militarily, it has a different kind of dimension. So therefore, you have to have a proper techno-military strategy to handle this kind of warfare. And that, I'm afraid, in terms of our concepts, in terms of our acquisition, in terms of our technological innovations, the DRDO work and all, is not going adequately in this direction. And that you need to expedite. And unless you expedite, you will have more of these incidents taking place. I mean, it is what a daring that they come inside the cantonment, they drop a bomb, and then they are able to go back, and we are not able to do anything at all. How is it acceptable? So you should have technology required that you should be able to neutralize their flight path by, the complete electromagnetic control system that they are using. Neutralize that, first thing. Detect that, neutralize that. Laser weapons, all these things you have to put across in a whole strategy, both from the military side as well as from the technical side. And I think it's high time that we started preparing for it.
We should, yes, and we should have been already prepared. We should have been prepared yesterday. Maybe we can use this as an example, Deeptiman, to now say, okay, let's wake up and let's quickly move on this. For whatever reasons we didn't. I was, looking at some information that our research teams pulled out, and we're looking at instances from 2019 in our country itself, where modules have been busted of and examples of drones carrying weapons, smuggling in weapons in Punjab, in the Jammu sector as well. And all of that, Deeptiman, still hasn't resulted in any kind of a alarm within the government corridors?
Well, it's a good question to ask because, see, let's remember that even before arms started being dropped, surveillance drones were being used, which were, there have been more than 100 sightings or 150 sightings a year of surveillance drones coming and going, and given the international trend of terrorists using it, of course, a security establishment has to anticipate, that this is finally going to translate into an attack. So, of course, as you rightly said, we had to be prepared yesterday, and we are late. Yes, the entire world at some level is struggling with this new threat. True. We are all, trying to come up with some sort of technology which can be customized to our needs, and we can detect, disable, and destroy these drones. But yes, we are late. Only government can answer as to why we haven't yet been able to either acquire or develop our own indigenous technology to deal with this.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Completely out of time, Maruf. My apologies, but I'll have to wrap up this part of the conversation. Thank you, General Malik, Maruf Raza, and Deepti Mantiwari for joining me on the first part of the conversation. The new threat that we're looking at, not new really, it's been around now for at least half a decade, if not more, where the terrorists themselves have been using it. There have been examples of drones being used for spying, drones being used for transportation of weapons, even in our country, modules that have been busted. This is now the first example of terrorists actually using it to drop explosives inside a military base, inside an Air Force station. Now, if this doesn't send the alarm bells ringing, then I don't know what will. We are looking at an extremely complicated challenge. A lot of the conversation will also have to be on regulating drones manufacturers, sale of it, the access for it, then the technology to detect it. A lot of our existing radar systems, most of it actually, cannot detect the drones which are out there. So you have to develop that technology, you have to bring it in and then identify the places where you want to put it first. A lot of work that needs to be done. That's the first part of our conversation.